Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Behdin is the co-founder and chief revenue officer of First AML. Having spent 7 years working in the corporate commercial banking space across 3 major banks, he experienced the impact of inefficient and unfriendly anti-money laundering processes firsthand. It was this experience that spurred him and his fellow co-founders to start First AML. Bion brings to clients a wealth of experience when it comes to anti-money laundering regulations and streamlining compliance. Given this is a period of increased scrutiny of the financial market in the face of Russian sanctions, money laundering and government financial conduct makes for a great discussion. First AML has just launched in the UK officially, as business look for solutions that help manage compliance requirements and the heightened risk of regulatory fines in today's climate. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Bion Behdin, welcome to the Extrology podcast. As it was with any of our guests, great to have you on as a guest, and really appreciate your time and really looking forward to getting stuck into conversation with you this afternoon. But as is customary with all things Extrology, we like to start from the early days and childhood and where it all began for you. So I guess inevitably the first question, where did you grow up and what therefore was childhood like for you?
Yeah, great to be on the show, Lee. And yeah, childhood was pretty interesting. My parents sort of dropped everything and moved to New Zealand when I was about 2 years old. So they'd grown up as in India, so they were originally Iranian, Farsi. Sort of their grandparents had left Iran and set up in Bombay, where a lot of Iranian people go essentially. And then I think it was after the Bombay riots in 91, 92, and my brother had just been born, that they were like, okay, look, like we want to essentially get somewhere else. So they applied for a few different visas, and New Zealand came up, and that's sort of where we ended up. So we were in the biggest city in New Zealand. I say biggest, it's not really that big. It's about I think it's like, at the time it would have been like 900,000 people. It's about 2 million people now in Auckland. And so yeah, grew up there. First couple of years was pretty interesting. As an immigrant kid, there's a lot of cultural stuff that you don't really understand about a nation until you're in it, or until the kids make fun of you enough that you stop doing those certain things. So upon reflection, it's been a pretty interesting sort of way to grow up.
Who were your heroes as a child? Who did you look up to as a child?
Yeah, I mean, we were always sort of football nuts growing up. Me and my brother. So Zola was a big sort of influence on our life, I guess, as a sort of hero. And probably my parents as well. Like, they worked so hard when we were younger. It sort of instilled quite a good work ethic in me and my brother. So I definitely say they were a massive influence on us and our lives.
That must have been interesting growing up in somewhere like Auckland, where a rugby mad city, and the All Blacks afforded almost godlike status in a country like New Zealand. To grow up as a football fan, which is very, albeit I know that New Zealand have qualified for a couple of World Cups, but I would imagine it's a minority sport. I would imagine in New Zealand, it must have been interesting growing up a football fan in that part of the world.
Yeah, Dad was always a big football fan, and I think it's just what was playing in our house. I mean, I was definitely still a big rugby fan. You kind of had to be with the All Blacks. It was sort of non-negotiable. But I remember the '95 World Cup, watching John Lamu just absolutely shred through everyone. So it was that was quite extraordinary at a very young age. Like, we'd play in the backyard, and probably a bit rough in terms of the tackling and that sort of stuff. But, that's just how you grew up. You grew up quite physical in New Zealand for sure.
Yeah, I've got a good pal of mine who's a Kiwi, who I remember the first time, probably 20 years ago, but was visiting the UK, came to watch me play a game of football, and about 10 minutes in, just shouted, "Oh, for God's sake, pick it up and run with it," was all he could think to say. I think he was very frustrated. So interesting as a child, sport, I guess, and from what you're saying, that was a very much part of what you were into. What sort of other things were you into?
Yeah, I think sport specifically was something that we were really big on growing up. I mean, when you grow up, we grew up pretty poor, like immigrant family and that sort of thing. Like, I don't know, the school day, 9 to 3 doesn't really make sense when both your parents are working. So, after school, me and my brother would sort of, and any of the kids that were left after school would have to entertain ourselves for a couple of hours. And, thank God we had sport. We had football and that sort of stuff. So we would just play and play and play until parents would show up at 5:30 because that's when my mum got off work and dad was working in a restaurant, so it was sort of all night for him. But that's just what you do. So sport was a massive influence on us, as well as just hanging out with friends and just doing all the regular sort of kid stuff you do on top of that.
So moving on to the career side of things, you spent nearly 7 years, as I recall, working for one of the world's top banks in the form of ANZ. What was behind the decision to pursue a career in corporate and commercial banking?
Yeah, that was a kind of funny one. Again, like when you're 18, they're like, "Hey, you need to pick a career for the rest of your life," which is not really, in my opinion, appropriate for an 18-year-old to be making that decision. Couldn't even figure out what girl I wanted to date, let alone let alone what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I actually fell into banking. I did a degree in ancient history and sociology, really. So really nothing to do with finance. And I remember, being at a summer internship, and I was just applying everywhere. I was like, what can I do? And I applied for, a finance sort of summer internship. And, one of the things I said was, look, you're going to hire 10 people that did a degree in finance, probably their parents work at the bank as well. Don't you want some people that have a different way of thinking? Yeah, I remember really clearly saying that in my interview. Like, you need some, diversity in thought. And yeah, they liked that comment, and I sort of did that and started on the FX desk. And I remember at the start of that, everyone's like, "Oh, foreign exchange, it's very prestigious at a bank," But I mean, and not to be rude to anyone in foreign exchange, it felt like I was at a call center. A client would ring up, and my job was to get the best rate possible for the bank. So essentially, ripping off the client. Really didn't enjoy that because it just felt like a call center. You'd answer, give them a rate that wasn't the best, but they needed to transact, and that's how you made your money. So I didn't think that was a very ethical way to make money. So quite quickly moved out of that and into the lending arm of the bank and into relationship management, where it really sort of came into my own there.
Interested in your comment going back to the interview that at that respectfully relatively early age, you'd gotten that perspective that recognised the need for different ways of thinking, different experiences. Where had that stemmed from, do you think?
Well, I think again, when you grow up in an immigrant family in a predominantly, well, it was predominantly white country at the time. It's a lot more diverse nowadays, but 90s and 2000s, growing up, you sort of do develop that. You look around and a lot of people are the same and that sort of stuff. And I think even when I was in commercial banking, I think I was like one of 3 brown people on a floor of 60 or 65, but and everyone same background, similar sort of background. So for me, I'd always sort of thought that, but when they asked me a question along like why should we hire you, it was just sort of the first thing that came to my head. I'm like, well, you could just hire the same person that did finance, did economics, did business in high school, went to these 5 high schools, or you could take a chance on someone else. I think that makes you work a lot harder as well. I remember working very, very hard at an early age because you do have a chip on your shoulder about that sort of stuff. I think that just comes, when I think about being honest with myself, it just comes with the territory sometimes.
And how much of an advantage do you think as you moved into that lending and relationship building, how much of an advantage do you think it is having the academic background that you'd enjoy, that you hadn't come from a finance from a study perspective, from a finance discipline, that you'd gotten a breadth of understanding separate from the commercial environment in which you found yourself, that therefore I would argue, I think that becomes an asset in terms of building relationships with people. Was that your experience too?
Yeah, I mean, like 90% of what we were doing was building relationships. Like, you were tasked with finding new business and getting transactions over the line. And to be honest, the financial side of it wasn't very hard to learn. That was the easy part. And funny, the big part of the job, so part of it's, external relationship building, which is very important for sourcing new deals. The other part of it is actually pitching those deals internally to your internal credit function. Finance is a really interesting space because it's not sales, because it's a bit of sales, but it's internal and external sales because you're selling to the customer, but then you're selling to your internal credit team to actually get a transaction over the line. And a lot of what we did was sort of qualitative, not quantitative, in terms of do we want to lend this large business money? Like, what's the financial outlook? All of those sort of things. And I wrote essays in university. I actually found that was really relevant to how you'd structure a credit paper, more so actually than the financial stuff, which was sort of pretty simple math. You could Google anything you didn't really know and figure that out quickly. But structuring a sentence or structuring an argument around why we should lend a customer money, that is a more technical skill. I think you learn if you do an ancient history degree, which is an interesting way to look at it, I think.
So what do you feel you learned from that 7 years with ANZ?
I think that's probably where I developed the entrepreneurial side of it. Like, I used to absolutely love how our customers would make money, and it gave me such exposure to dealing with sort of high-level executives in companies, and and to see them use debt, use equity as a way to basically build pretty large businesses in very short amounts of time. So there's not a lot of jobs that you can do that show you how a toy company makes money, how a trucking company makes money, how a software business makes money, than actually funding those businesses, because you have to have an intimate knowledge about how they generate revenue, their margins, the sales cycle, all of that sort of really, really, really good knowledgeable stuff, and exposure to such a wide range of different kinds of businesses. So that was definitely the number one thing I learned, and what I really, really enjoyed for a long time.
Which I guess therefore begs the question and leads me on nicely to my next question was going to be, when did you first start to form the idea behind what ultimately became First AML? But if I might take that back a stage further, it almost begs the question in my mind as to why First AML, given why not a trucking company or a toy company or whatever, given the exposure that you're enjoying, that sort of depth of learning to which you refer, seeing at first hand how organisations made money, I guess why First AML?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So there were two criteria in which I judged, rightly or wrongly, what a good business looked like. One had to be boring. So, the wine companies we had on our portfolio, not doing very well. The street sweeping companies doing very well. The boring stuff was doing really, really well. So that was one of the criteria of, like, if I was going to go start something, I wanted it not to be flashy. And to be honest, anti-money laundering now I feel is a lot more flashy than it is. But when we first started, it was regulation tech. It was like really what we call boring stuff. So that ticked a big box for me. The other thing was it had to be something that I knew a little bit about. Right, the good thing about finance is you learn a lot of stuff, but you don't really learn any hard skills. So I couldn't go start an electrical engineering company. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So it had to be something that I just knew just even a little fraction about. And onboarding customers was something that I knew the pain of firsthand, because we had to do it at the bank, and we would do an absolutely miserable job of onboarding our customers. So the stars sort of aligned for us in terms of that regard.
Do you remember, was there a day where you thought, that's it, there's the moment, that sort of eureka moment where you thought, actually, there's a number of an idea here that I'm going to build a business from this?
Yeah, I think like we had got an email around and it said, hey, New Zealand anti-money laundering rules are changing in the next 12 months. Right now it only applies to the financial sector, but that's about to extend to law, real estate, and accounting. And I remember sitting there and thinking, there's no way in hell these guys are going to be able to do this effectively. Like, we can't even do it effectively. We've got 25 analysts sitting in a room, and this is all they do. As a bank, we can chuck money at it, but small to medium-sized businesses are going to be under tremendous burden to do client onboarding properly shortly. So this is a big new market. So that was the kind of aha moment. I'm like, well, if we can develop something and make something and sort of do it for them, that was the whole ethos of the business. No one wanted to do AML, so we'd just do it for you. Was our whole ethos, and still our ethos today. Still works today.
Your thought was, therefore, technology would be the facilitator, the provider of that solution. Had you any kind of tech smarts around? From you often hear stories of sort of founders need, well, hey, you're not a tech expert, so therefore, how could you build a tech business? How did you get started? Where did it all stem from?
Yeah, so we built it backwards. We got customers and revenue before we had it. We didn't even think technology when we first started it, to be honest. We started it as a, hey, we'll do it for you, outsourcing business. That's how it originally started. So we just before we even had basically anything, we pulled a pitch deck together I would go during my lunch break at the bank, go to a law firm and say, hey, this legislation's changing shortly. Would you like to know about this fantastic new company called First AML and how we're going to solve this problem that you don't have yet, which is always a hard sell, how we're going to solve this problem for you. So we didn't have any technology when we launched. We barely had a process. We had to figure all of it out. But I think when people think about technology businesses and they look at, hey, you have to have a tech background and, that sort of stuff, like it is important to build the right people around you for that sort of stuff. But what you really need to do, as with any business, is solve a problem. And we had a very, very clear line of sight into what the problem was that we were trying to solve. And we knew firsthand about how painful that problem was and still is for a lot of people. So if you start a business with that hyper focus on what is the problem you're trying to solve and will people pay you to solve that problem, everything else you can figure out.
With respect to those early conversations, was there I guess the challenges hindsight's a wonderful thing, but as I try and process that in my own mind, that the challenge within business is that, inevitably there'd been an awareness that this, I would imagine in most cases, that this problem was coming down the track. But for most of us in business, there's an acknowledgement that those things will happen, but hey, I've got problems here today that I need to fix now. So how did you overcome that sense of, we'll get to it?
Volume, right? Like, do not let it discourage you. We used to use the analogy in these pitches all the time that, look, everyone wants to try and paint their own house, right? But they do one room and then they get the professionals to do it, because you do sanding, in the study, it takes you 3 weeks, barely get a coat of paint on. Maybe you end up with a massive fight with your partner and you nearly break up. So that's how we described AML when we launched. So there were a few people that just got it, people who had done AML, in finance and then worked in law or something like that, that were just like, we know that this is going to be a major problem, so you guys just do it for us, which was great. A lot of people didn't get it. They were like, it's fine, that we just have to collect a few IDs, we'll be okay, or your pricing's a bit expensive. A lot of those people signed up 12 months later. I remember the first firm we ever pitched to was that they actually had done my the settlement for my property. So I bought a house and they did the settlement, and I said, hey, as part of you being my lawyer, can I come pitch to you this anti-money laundering stuff? So I pitched to them and they were like, no, it's fine, we'll be fine. 18 months later, we went back in and then we showed them the solution and then we were going to do it all for them. And they said to me, it's like, oh, we're going to lunch early and we're popping champagne. We don't have to do this anymore. We're so happy. And it's just funny, just pitching at the start and then going back in 18 months later and closing the transaction was that was a moment. It was quite cathartic for us. We're like, we're really onto something here.
Am I right in thinking there are 3 of you co-founders within the bit? How did the 3 of you meet? What's the story behind the 3 of you?
Yeah, so Chris Kago used to work with me at the bank. He used to look after our sort of healthcare division, and at the time it was bonus season at the bank, where you just sort of put your hand out and, please, sir, can I have anything? Which was quite, and at the, when we first started talking about the business, I had just done this deal for a scaffolding company, and it was a 33-year-old who left his corporate job, bought a scaffolding company. We funded into him for a few years, and he ended up selling it to private equity for about 15 mil within a 3-year period. So I'd just seen that and gone, okay, I need to do something. Chris was working in healthcare, and one of his customers had flown him on his chopper to one of the retirement villages. So he was sitting there going, oh God, we need to do something. So I pitched him the idea. And at the same time, unbeknownst to me, he was talking to his old school friend, Millen, who he didn't actually know that well in high school, but Millen, who's our third co-founder and CEO, he had just moved back from London where he was working at Bain, and he was actually asking Chris, how do I borrow money to buy a business, because I don't want to work in a corporate anymore. So Chris had said to me and Millen, hey, I've got this, we've got this, you need to meet Bion, and Bion, you need to meet Millen. So the 3 of us sat down, we had a beer, and I pulled out a Excel spreadsheet, which I had done some calculations and on a piece of paper, and I said, look, if we charge this much, this is how much we could make. All absolutely wildly inaccurate, by the way. I just want to say I would love to find that piece of paper. But at the time, then we were like, yeah, let's just give it a go. And we spent, I think it was Easter 2018, in my home, and we turned the couch around and put some A3 pieces of paper on a wall and just started brainstorming like how to build a business, really.
And at what point did you resign from the day job and, accepting you're running around at lunch on your lunch break making pitches? At what point did you say, right, this is a business, right? We need to, this is a full-time pursuit. We need to make this work.
So the best part about having co-founders is you can, come up with agreements on how to stagger, leaving your jobs, which we did over a 12-month period. So Millen left first as, to be CEO. About 6 months later, Chris left, and then about 3 months later, I left. So, it had a bit to do with how much cash flow the business was generating and that sort of thing. So we could afford to leave, sort of thing, take very reduced pay salary to do it. But yeah, I don't think we'd do it any differently now, for sure.
And in terms of some of the challenges that you faced in those early days, apart from getting over that sense of, well, here's a problem. And I mean, I think your painting the house analogy is a great analogy, but what were some of the other challenges that you faced in those early days?
Oh, look, with regulation technology, a lot of it is trust. So building trust from a company with no employees to what it is today takes time. So that was really hard. We had some very powerful early adopters, which really changed the game for us. Still customers today. I don't think we've churned any of those. They really helped us build credibility quite quickly. But with regulation technology, it's always what's this person doing? Can we get a reference and all of that sort of stuff? So the feedback loop is very, very important when you're doing stuff in regulated space. That was definitely a big challenge for us early on. But again, with that sort of stuff, you just have to. It's a volume game at the start. You have to get early adopters. You have to get people on the platform. So whether it's big discounting or whatever you need to do to build that credibility, that's just what you need to do.
And was there a moment at which the three of you sat down and thought, hey, wow, this has gone from an idea to respectfully three guys making that idea happen to, well, this is starting to scale. This is really starting to take off.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we've had a few of those moments that feel quite surreal. I think we got to 1 million ARR, and then we had launched version 1 of our platform. And I don't think we realized what a big deal it was because, again, we didn't know tech when we first started. We know a lot now, but when we first started, and people were like, getting to 1 million ARR is like really, really difficult. And we're like, oh, is it? We had no idea because we were just head down, sort of, we were like, oh, well, we need revenue. Let's go get revenue. So we were always from day one sort of hyper focused on becoming, being a revenue generating business, not a this will make revenue one day sort of business. And maybe that comes from a little bit rightly or wrongly from a finance background on being very afraid of cash burn and things like that. Again, my mentality on that has shifted quite a bit over the last few years into not being very afraid of cash burn again, but that will, I think, change again, just given the current economic climate that we're in. But back to the point, yeah, it was, we got to 1 million ARR and we had launched version 1 of our platform, and then we had done our seed round, and then we were like, wow, there's some, we could really do something here.
And the seed round to which you referred, at what point did you sit down and think, okay, that we need to raise? The business now needs above and beyond what we've, we're generating revenue, but actually, in order that we can scale, was there a pivotal moment? I'm just thinking in terms of people who are at this stage of, they've got the number of an idea, they're starting to get some traction, they're getting things off the ground. At what point might you advise from your own experience it's time to get out there and start talking to prospective investors?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on what your life goals are. I mean, look, we only have one life, right? So if there's a lot of people that want to grow slowly, they want to grow over time, reinvest in the business and have, a 15-year cycle. But, the way I look at stuff and the way I think about it, the most valuable asset I have is time, like that's it, right? At the end of the day, that's all we have. So for me specifically, and I can't talk to the other co-founders on what their thought process was, but for me, it was like, well, if we can go faster and go harder, I'd rather have, a small piece of a really, something special that we built in a short amount of time than a large piece of something that's taken 15 to 20 years of my life. So that was my thought process in terms of raising cash. But again, everyone's journey is different on this sort of stuff. I think when you get into the cash raising frenzy, it's really easy to start thinking, hey, I've made it. But you have to remember that when you raise the money, that's when the pressure comes on. The pressure isn't raising the money. It's then, okay, how do we spend it to get to our next target? So, increasingly at every funding round, the pressure only increases. It doesn't decrease. So if people aren't, ready for a journey like that, I don't recommend it. But if you want to try and build something, quickly that could be very special, then I think the ability, raising capital is a really good way to do that.
It's interesting. I suspect that many who'd not been through it, might anticipate that the pressure is in raising the finance, but that once you've gotten the finance, you can kind of just breathe out and relax a little bit because you've got at least a little bit of runway from which you can then start to focus on how you're going to utilize that capital to really grow. But from what you're saying, actually, all that does is it's just another hurdle you're over before it becomes an even bigger hurdle that you've got to realize the value in that investment.
Well, yeah, I mean, since raising our Series B, I think we've hired 80 people, 70
Yeah.
people, maybe 70 people in the space of 4 months. 35 contracts now out for the UK. 25 have started, and we have to launch in a new market. So, to be honest, pre-Series B, there wasn't as much pressure. Yeah, so that's what I think a lot of people don't realize is, that raising the money isn't the end goal. It's the enabler to help you reach your next goal.
So tell me, so you started out in Auckland, expanded into Australia in Sydney, and now London. Is that right? So tell us a bit about the sort of how did the expansion unfold?
Yeah, I mean, look, New Zealand is an amazing place to start a company. I think we have some of the most friendly rules in the world in terms of starting with very little capital, which has been amazing for us. The drawback is the TAM, right? It's a country of 4 million people. If you want to create $1 billion business, you need to move countries. So we first started with Australia because operationally we can still basically do that out of New Zealand. So that was, like if you have some capital but not a lot of capital, I wouldn't recommend launching in a market like the UK. It's especially if you've got. I mean, again, it depends on your product, but we're a consultative B2B software company, so that's a very different. It's heavy on the salespeople and the process and that sort of thing. So Australia was the logical step, bigger TAM, not significantly bigger, but bigger customers, that sort of thing. So it was a logical first step for us. It was cheaper to launch than a market where you'd have to spin up operations as well. So the majority of Australia is salespeople and customer success people, so managing those customer relationships. And then, when we raised the B, it's like, okay, well, what's the big market that needs help with anti-money laundering? And London, being the money laundering capital of the world, was the logical choice for us. Culturally, it's very similar to New Zealand, Australia. London's a lot more expensive, but because we raised that capital, it was the very clear, logical next step for us.
And for those that don't know specifically what First AML does, how would you describe that?
Yeah, so we do, I guess, what we call complex customer onboarding. So we specialize in onboarding companies, trusts, partnerships, and overseas entities. In my opinion, that's where the majority of money laundering occurs. So if you're a oligarch and you're trying to hide your money in London, you do not invest it under your personal name because that's the dumbest thing you could do, right? So what do? You set up a UK company, which, by the way, takes 15 minutes on the company's house in the UK. You have that company owned by a foreign trust. The trustees of that trust are your lawyers, and you may be a beneficiary of that trust. So you will layer your ownership structure under complex companies and trusts and that sort of thing. What First AML does is it digs right to the bottom of that entity structure and finds out who owns it, verifies them, screens them for PEP and sanction checks and that sort of thing, and makes sure that no one dodgy essentially sits behind these complex entities. So it's an end-to-end solution for doing that. Now, for people doing that internally, that's an absolute nightmare. Digging through corporate structures, trying to figure out how to read trust deeds. A lot of companies have their frontline staff doing it. I used to have to do it at the bank as a relationship manager. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. It's not my job. My job isn't that. So a lot of companies in the UK are really, really struggling to deal with that sort of complexity because all of a sudden there's a very big spotlight on it now. So that's what we're here to help with, and the reception so far has been phenomenal.
And this is sort of, again, forgive my ignorance, but this is around know your customer legislation. Is that what drives? It's the regulatory framework that you're able to provide, but it's driven by that kind of KYC type of legislation.
Yeah, so it's all about knowing your customer in terms of who you're transacting with. So as a lawyer, when you onboard someone that wants to use your trust account to buy 14 properties in the UK, you need to understand who that client is. As a real estate agent, if you're listing a property for someone, you need to make sure that the person you're listing it with or the entity you're listing it with didn't illegally obtain that property. Those checks, unfortunately, the incentive structure is pretty skewed to do those checks very lightly and not do a very good check of it, because it generates these businesses tremendous sums of money. Law firms that help people buy 15 properties make a lot of money on the conveyancing, on the legal fees that are associated with that sort of stuff. So there is and it's just human nature. People work on incentives, and unfortunately, money laundering has a very big incentive for all the parties that help facilitate it. So when you use First AML, you remove that incentive from your frontline staff by getting us to do those checks for you. So I think that's a really, really key point. And it's really easy to sit there and go, oh, they shouldn't be dealing with those people. But, because of the way incentive structures are set up, like a lot of these people, they're not trying to be bad. They're just trying to hit their target. Like if you're a partner at a law firm and you're not bringing in £2 million a year, you're in trouble. So, it's just human nature to cut corners and that sort of thing in the drive for revenue. So why give them that incentive? Why allow them to have that incentive? Just use First AML and we'll take care of it for you.
Has there, given the circumstances geopolitically in which we find ourselves today, we've obviously had lots of media scrutiny around the sanctioning of oligarchs as a consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Has that created or magnified the spotlight placed on anti-money laundering provision, have you found, within the UK? Or has it always been there? The media are talking about it more. How's that impacted business from your perspective?
Look, I think for a number of years, the UK's just let it happen because the financial incentive has been so great and the regulatory oversight has been woeful. And to be honest, it's just not been up to scratch. That is changing. That is definitely changing. From the engagement we've had with UK firms, people really see now as the time to, hey, we need to step it up. If we deal with a sanctioned individual, it's £1 million fine instantly. First transaction we do. We're seeing a lot more enforcement coming in. Some senators in the US, actually, I just read an article the other day. They said, hey, we should consider sanctioning UK law firms that have helped oligarchs in the past. That is crazy rhetoric coming out of the US for one of the saying we're going to sanction some of our biggest allies' law firms. But that's how serious this has gotten now. And there's just more ethical ways to make money, and I think a lot of people are waking up to that.
It's a fascinating time. I mean, I think if you flip back on the raises that you raised, 30 million last November to drive further growth. Based on your experience, what advice might you give any aspiring entrepreneur or management team who are considering raising external capital?
Yeah, I'd say right now is a very, very difficult time to do that. There's been a bloodbath in the markets. Valuations aren't where they used to be, even 3 months ago. Right now, if you've got capital in the bank, it's a great time to extend runway and really look at your key metrics. Last year, if you say that there are 4 key metrics that a software company can raise off, that's revenue growth, customer acquisition cost. Well, there's a few others. They escape me right now, but there's about 4 key metrics. Last year, it was getting so crazy that if you had one of those 4 key metrics or 2 of those 4 key metrics, you could raise at a very big valuation. But at the moment, external capital is looking for you to have at least 3 or 4 out of 4 of those key metrics really, really showing sort of top percentile stuff. So it's very hard to raise money at the moment. But I think if you are going out to market, make sure you partner with people that really understand your business, because a lot of VCs and that sort of stuff will all tell you, hey, we're here to help, we're going to do all this for you, but really at the end of the day, like, no one knows your business better than yourself. So back that instinct. A lot of these portfolio companies, they've got 50 to 100 investments. Like, really, they just need 2 to get to unicorn status, and they've made their fund back. So their punt is 1 in 30, 1 in 50. Your punt is 1 in 1. So, really, really back yourself. Like, no one knows your business better than you do. And just be careful with your capital, because once it's gone, there's not an endless supply of it, right?
So what do you see as being among the advantages of working as part of a co-founder team?
Honestly, I don't know how sole founders do it. I think they're psychotic. My hats go off.
There's probably lots of research that would evidence that.
My hats go off to anyone that is a sole founder. That must be insane. Yeah, but when we look at what our business is and the business strengths that each of us have, as chief revenue officer, I'm very well focused on sales and marketing, and I can really leave some of this other stuff off my plate to the other two. I think working as a team of two or three really just allows you to scale faster because the decision making process isn't 100% on you. You can only make 12 to 15 good decisions a day. Well, with three co-founders, you can make 45 good decisions a day if you empower each other to make those decisions. So I definitely think it's allowed us to scale a lot faster. A couple of drawbacks on that sort of stuff is you have to be very close to your co-founders. They have to be people you like. If you don't, I mean, I can tell you like 10, 15, 20 stories of just me personally who know tech companies that basically fallen apart, or just any sort of company that's fallen apart over founder disputes. So you have to be very cognizant of that. It's like a relationship that you have with someone else, like a partner. You have to work on it. You have to understand where they're coming from and really spend time building a solid relationship with your co-founders, because so many businesses fall apart because of that tension.
I wonder as to how much of an advantage it might have been the fact that you knew each other, there was a link, but you hadn't, as I understand it anyway, you hadn't grown up together. You'd been close, certainly, as kids growing up, teenagers growing up, but there was a connection, and therefore it sounds as though good foundation for a relationship. But I imagine that relationship's evolved substantially as a consequence of working alongside one another. But you didn't have a lot of history that you're bringing into it.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of like we had the same sort of wavelength or mentality about what we wanted to achieve, and being relentlessly focused on that has allowed us to sort of have a really good working relationship. When we have arguments, that sort of stuff, we all know, and we all have different sort of opinions on where the business should go, what product we should build next. Again, I'm very biased as chief revenue officer. I want revenue-facing products. The chief customer officer is very biased in that he wants what his customers are telling us to retain them, their sort of products. But I think once we, if you realize that everyone around you is just trying to do the best thing for the business, you can have those very robust, very direct conversations and still come away and have a beer afterwards. I think that's a really good sort of litmus test for if you have a good relationship with your co-founders.
So in terms of the three most important things you've learned as a result of the business you've grown to date, how would you describe them?
Product vision, I think, is something that everyone building a company needs to be really, really clear of. Like, what is your North Star and where are you headed? That's really, really key. Core values, I think, is a super important one. And I'll be the first to admit that when we introduced the concept of values into our company, I was very against it. I'd just come from a big corporate where they had values on the wall, and in my opinion, they were all bull. It was all bull. And I was like, we don't need values. It's corporate BS. And I'll be the first one to say that I couldn't have been more wrong. Having a concrete core set of values that you actually believe makes a huge difference to your business. That allows you to essentially make difficult decisions. If you're going left or right and they both seem like they're going to be okay options, being able to go back to your core values and go, actually, which decision relates to these core values more, actually makes the decision process really, really easy. And if you keep going back to that, it makes decision making a lot easier. It makes you make better decisions, in my opinion, because you're staying true to your core. So I think having a core set of values is very, very important. And then investing in things that scale early. So there's two types of ways to spend money. One is, on stuff that's useless and, frivolous, like a $10,000 board table. Like, you don't need that sort of thing. It's another to invest $10,000 or $20,000 into your CRM build, which will allow you to add information correctly first time, pull insights and data, and then push that out. There's nothing worse than switching from Pipedrive to HubSpot to Salesforce over a 5-year period, and then by the end of that 5 years, all your customer data is screwed. So building like core things and spending money on things that scale, I would say is really, really up there in things that we've learned as well.
And as I understand it, the market opportunity, well, certainly the market opportunity for First AML is huge. I'd read the market has grown by 20% this year to date alone to what is now a $214 billion industry. So what really excites you about the future for First AML?
Yeah, look, I'm super excited for, the UK market is just so big, and it's it's somewhere we want to play. The stuff that really gets me excited is, our vision for this is to really help like everyday people access the financial system while limiting criminal exploitation. And to be honest, that second part, it's an uphill battle, right? Like the criminals are getting more and more sophisticated and that sort of stuff. But the fact that as we grow, we cast a wider net and can limit some of this criminal exploitation, which money laundering surfaces itself in some of the worst of humanity. Like we're talking, child trafficking, sex slaves, that sort of slavery, like exotic animal sort of poaching and that sort of thing. That this is where these dollars are come from, and I'm really excited as we scale. I feel really passionately about the fact that yes, it's an uphill battle, but shit, at least we're on the right side of history about it.
Yeah, I guess to your point, criminality gets ever more sophisticated, and yet that we might be led to believe we're all far more widely exposed, if that's the right expression, in so much as the visibility that we all enjoy as a consequence of social media, for example. We're also interconnected and also visible in that respect, that you'd imagine it gets ever harder. But I suppose as we become, that visibility increases, people find ever smarter ways to ensure that they stay below the radar, and that the ways in which they're transacting and engaging stay very much below and it gets more complex, more demanding as a consequence. On businesses like yours, creates a greater market opportunity though as a consequence.
Yeah, and absolutely. And they come out with stats like that they estimate that the Russian oligarchs own $25 billion of London property, and I can tell you for free right now that it's way more than that. The problem is the estimations, in my opinion, of how much money is laundered globally is woefully low, and that's the terrifying thing, because it is. I think they estimate 2 trillion globally. In my opinion, it's way more than that. So it's for us as a society, like we have to set better incentive structures around this for our reporting entities to make them, number one, easier to comply, because it is a real pain at the moment for them. That's where we come in to help. But number two is really, really make sure that the incentives are aligned to actually stopping this stuff and not generating significant amounts of cash to allow money laundering to happen.
From a purpose perspective, not only are you providing a great solution that businesses need, but there's a societal impact to what it is that you're addressing as well.
Yeah, the societal impact for us is the reason we get out of bed in the morning. Like we've recruited engineers, salespeople, product people, a lot of people that feel very, very strongly about the purpose of the business and actually, having an impact on society. We got some amazing engineers from payments companies and buy now, pay later providers, and they felt very strongly about the fact that they were they felt like they were contributing to a detriment at their previous job, and it's like this feels like atonement for them. So hearing those sort of stories really fill my cup in terms of what makes me really want to come here and make this the best business possible.
So what is it that you hope First AML to achieve?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't really think about that, to be honest. I'm just enjoying the journey. I caught up with a friend of mine's dad who sold his tech company. He's like 66, 67. When I was telling him I was moving to London and 32 now, and we're going to expand over there, he just sat there and he said, I would give back every dollar I've made if I could be 32 and doing what you're doing. And I think when we're a lot of tech folk, they really focus on the end goal because it is stressful and there's a million things going on all the time. But I think if we can have fun along the way, I think then that would be my hope for the company. As long as we enjoyed ourselves and we made a difference, no matter where we end up, be it unicorn status or half that or quarter that or whatever it is, as long as I can go to bed at night and think, hey, this was a fun journey, it was awesome, then I'd be pretty stoked about it.
So who has been the greatest influence on your career, Bion, and why?
That's a really good question. It's probably my first boss at the bank, actually. He's gonna absolutely love this if he hears this. He actually lives in London now, and my country manager used to work with me in finance in New Zealand, and both of us were under this sort of same boss. And his passion and energy for staff is something that I've taken forward. Definitely, I've taken a lot of learnings from that and how I permeate into the organization at the moment. But taking a real interest in our careers when we were quite young had a real lasting impact on me, and that's one of my favorite aspects of this business is when we hire a young SDR who's didn't find uni working for him, and he dropped out and did an amazing interview with us. bringing someone like that into the organization, and I'm like, this is why we do this. I remember saying that. So definitely my first boss at in banking really impacted how I am as a leader, I'd say.
And so, who do you admire?
Honestly, probably my parents. They had really nothing when they moved to New Zealand, and really gave everything to me and my brother growing up. It's what's allowed me to do this, right? Like, a lot of people don't have the opportunities that I've had, and I'm eternally grateful for them to, giving me those opportunities. And so I feel very blessed. And my they'd always have this saying. They said, like, really take pride in what you do, no matter what you're doing. And when I was stocking shelves at a pack and save, I used to love making it full and making it really clean, and you get a lot more enjoyment from your job if you cared. And that's something that I've really taken forward. And one of my co-founders, Millen, we bonded over it because he used to work at McDonald's, and he would always make the burger really nice, because I think that is really important, like caring about what you're doing, no matter what it is, whether it's stocking shelves or trying to build a sales team in a new country. I think as long as you care about it, you'll do a good job.
I agree. So what does success mean to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I guess, success for us is just like the people. Like, if people within our organization can grow and learn and have an impact. Look, a success for me is me being able to step away and the business just carrying on like it's its own organism. I think that would be really, really special one day for that to happen. And I think that would mean, it's a really successful business.
And who or what inspires you?
Yeah, it's another good question. It's a hard one to answer. In terms of what really gets me out of bed is, again, just what we're doing in the business in terms of the social aspect of it. That really inspires me to, we have cases where we've caught, I can't go into too much detail about it, obviously, but we've caught money launderers, and that really gets me out of bed. It, gets everyone super excited. Closing a deal, nothing like closing a deal. We have a bell in every country that we've had to special order. So that gets rung every time a deal's closed. Seeing an account executive close their first transaction is something that really gets me excited and gets me out of bed.
So given the journey and the trajectory that First AML is on, I wonder if my next question might be a moot point, but I was going to say, away from work, how do you unwind or relax? Do you get any time away from work, and therefore how do you relax?
Yeah, so the hardest thing about starting a company that's based in New Zealand is it's the opposite side of the planet. So when I'm going to sleep, they're waking up, unfortunately. That's really, really hard. But, like, it's just what I'm really enjoying about London is the markets. So every weekend I try and get to a different market. I think, the best thing about this city is there's just so much to see and do. So I've just been spending my any spare time I get, exploring. I'll take meetings while walking, that sort of thing, and just getting around and seeing the city, which has been amazing.
Had you been to London before you launched here?
Like 3 days, maybe 7 years ago. So not really. So I say I have, but I really don't think I have at all. So it's been phenomenal, and I've always thought I'd love it. So it's great to be here and loving it.
Has it been what you imagined it was going to be?
Yeah, I think so. It's I don't think you quite get coming from sort of New Zealand, Australia, when you get on the tube here and on the bus, I don't think anything prepares you for how packed they can get. So it's that's been an interesting experience for sure.
And what about reading? Are you a reader? And therefore, what might you be reading currently?
Yeah, so I'm reading a book at the moment called Barbarians at the Gate. I don't know if you've heard of it, but super interesting book about the excess of the financial system in the 70s and 80s, and how sort of one of the biggest companies in the US basically
Nabisco? Was it about Nabisco?
Yeah, yes. Nabisco basically self-destructing because of the leverage buyout. Super interesting parallels, honestly, to basically the last couple of years, in the crypto space and in the tech space, and in terms of the excess of capital causing just wacky things to happen in markets.
Yeah, I think it's always been one of I'm a voracious reader. It's on my list. I've never read it, but I've always thought I should. You've just inspired me to
great read.
To get it ordered.
Yeah,
it's a great read, isn't it?
Yeah,
fantastic. So looking back, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Yeah, I think I don't know. Maybe it's a guy thing, but you really don't feel yourself until you're 28, 29, I'd probably tell myself not to stress out so much. You're really just forming as a human being at 21, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd just say, like don't stress out about the little things. The things you care about actually don't matter at all. And you only sort of learn that, I think, as you get a little bit older in terms of like where you should actually focus your energy. Don't stress about things you can't change. I think that, I've really learned that these days. If you can't change the trajectory of the sun, so why stress out about it, right? So I think that's a big thing I tell myself at 21.
And what does the future look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It depends where we launch next, I guess. As Chief Revenue Officer, I'm sort of been tasked as the one to sort of open up new markets. I tend to think, well, we'll be in Europe for a while. It's just such a massive market with such a big opportunity and need. Sort of depends on, where we end up with the next round, if we do another round, or, what sort of happens next. But yeah, at the moment, I'm just sort of taking it day by day. I try not to think too far ahead because, to be honest, I have no idea. I didn't think I'd be doing this a year ago. 2 years ago. Definitely didn't think I'd be doing what I was last year. So I tend to just sort of think a couple of months ahead maximum. That's why I don't have any trips booked for summer yet, actually. I should probably get onto that.
But I guess the business lends itself naturally to the major financial hubs. So without asking it, we clearly break commercial confidence, but naturally Paris, Frankfurt from a European perspective, perhaps Tokyo, New York. It's that kind of traditional financial footprint, I guess, inevitably the business is likely to follow.
Yeah, that's where all the money laundering happens, right? It's in the big financial hubs. So yeah, I'd definitely say it would be one of those places. The US, if they ever get their stuff together around actually setting up a proper AML regime. But yeah, there's just endless sort of options there.
Is it driven state by state in the US? Is that part of the challenge?
Yeah, it's all state by state, and everyone's got different legislator about it. Actually, the US it's kind of funny. They have one of the most advanced digital identification systems in the world, being their social security numbers. So it's quite funny. They had digital identity long before anyone else because of those identifiers.
Interesting. So where can people go to find out more about First AML?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're in a regulated industry, legal, accounting, law, or financial services, just check out our website, firstaml.com. And yeah, you can literally just book a demo or get in contact with one of our team. If you're in the UK, just ask for me if you want. I'm more than happy to come along to a pitch. I like to stay really close to the tools. I think it's super important, understanding what your prospects need and that sort of stuff. So yeah, just firstaml.com, and you can just go from there. It's pretty simple.
Fantastic, Bion. It's been great to speak with you. I think First AML, it's a fascinating journey that you're on, and I'm sure that we shall very much look forward to seeing you go from strength to strength, and I'm sure that unicorn status one day will be one that will materialise, given not only the strength of the proposition and the capability of you and your colleagues, but not least the nature of the market. As you say, the direction of travel is such that this is only going to become an ever bigger and bigger issue. So I wish you well in your endeavours, and I really appreciate you taking the time out this afternoon to share some of your journey with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Lee. It's been a great conversation.
Fantastic. All the best. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Extrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.